Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever is most appropriate, and welcome to this special webinar on wisdom. And before I begin, as quite a few of you will know, the great inspiration behind the whole program of religions working with the environment was His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. He was the international president of WWF, who in 1986 invited to Assisi representatives of the 5 major religions that he was keen to work with, which was Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. And it was the first time ever that the faiths had come together with all the major environmental groups, not just WWF. From that then sprang the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, which he founded with myself in 1995, by which time there were 12 major faiths that had joined, and that has been the strength of the movement ever since. He died last Friday at the age of 99, and we are in mourning for him. He was a wonderful friend, a marvelous colleague, a great mate, and without his energy and his support and his vision, so many years ago, that the faiths could play a major role in protecting people and planet, we would not be here today. So this wisdom webinar is dedicated in his memory and his honor. So today we're going to look at wisdom. And when we talk about wisdom, what is it and how does it fit within something like this? Well, the Faith Long-Term Plans are a response to the fact that the world is in crisis. And the world is in crisis because of the way that we have lived and the things that we have forgotten, the wisdoms that we had in the past, and a search for new wisdom as to how we can live with the kind of crises that we confront. The United Nations came to us and asked Faith Invest and the WWF Beliefs and Values if we could relaunch something that we began first in 2009, at which point Prince Philip and Ban Ki-moon, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, received 64 long-term commitments by faiths to address the issues of protecting people and planet. That was very successful. It led to the creation of a number of organizations like EcoSeek and the Taoist Ecological Temple Network and other projects all around the world. This time round, we are launching a much bigger program, more ambitious, and the Faith Long-Term Plans could well end up being around about 1,000 organizations. We are supported by a whole range of groups. We have what we call umbrella groups that we're working with, groups that say, right, we will take this out to our faithful and help them to develop their own plans. This is something that we are in discussion with the Vatican around, also with the Anglican Communion around the world, but also with Boom Global, the great Hindu network, basically groups saying this is a great idea. Let's get our members, our organizations to join this and then come together. We're also supported by secular groups such as the British government and the Italian government as well, ahead of COP26, but also with groups like WWF and the World Resources Institute. So we're very grateful for this. We're tapping in, obviously, to the SDGs target of 2030, and the long-term plans are designed to be between 7 to 10 years, depending on what is appropriate for each faith group. And we will be launching the major details about these in late September or early October, in order that we can then get this into the thinking for COP26 in November about climate change. But we will launch the full details just before the meeting in Stockholm next year in June, which is the 50th anniversary of the first ever UN program and conference on the environment. So that is our timetable, that is our scope, and certainly the response that we've had has been quite fantastic. So up to the COP26 is really bringing on board as many faith traditions and communities as possible, and then helping them with our secular partners to have the background knowledge. For example, we know there's great focus on tree planting, so we're working with a Trillion Trees program, who are going to be our partner in helping the faiths to understand what would be the most appropriate trees to plant and how to do this, and how to rebuild forestry and restore landscapes. And then by Stockholm 50 in June next year, we hope to be able to launch what the UN is already describing as the largest civil society movement to protect the planet. So that's our timeline. We have 7 key areas that we're exploring, and in a whole process of webinars, many of which have already taken place and details of which will be put up, we're exploring the 7 areas. So there is, first of all, the use of assets. We discovered some time ago that many faiths simply do not know or did not know how much they owned in terms of financial assets, how much land they had, or even how many schools or universities they had, or medical facilities that they had. So one part of this is actually work out what you own as faiths, because we are amongst the major stakeholders of the planet. We own a great deal of the planet and we shape a lot of it. Education is the second area. The faiths are provide 50% of all schools worldwide, or involved with 50% of schools all worldwide. And UNICEF claims that within sub-Saharan Africa, that figure rises to 64%. But it's not just formal education. There are 4 major youth organizations around the world that have very strong links with the faith, who between them have nearly 300 million young people involved. That ranges from the Scouts and the Guides to the YMCAs and YWCAs. In terms of our impact, media is huge. We have thousands of radio stations and hundreds of television stations. We have newspapers, we have magazines, we have websites galore. We have a great impact. People trust something that comes through the religious media more than they do perhaps through the internet and through social media. But also we have an advocacy role. We are trusted. As faiths, we are trusted far more than most governments, certainly more than most international agencies or NGOs, because we've always been there. We always will be there. Wisdom is what we're going to explore today. Lifestyles is obvious as well. Depending on what you believe and the values that you imbue from those beliefs, that shapes your lifestyle. And we will be looking a little bit at that in terms of wisdom as well. And then partnerships. We don't have to do this alone. There is a vast store of amazing knowledge, insight, teachings, wisdom, and science that we can draw upon as faiths. But no other group has the reach that faiths do. Conservationists largely talk to each other. When they talk to us, they talk to the world. And then finally, celebrations. And again, I'll be touching on that in this wisdom introduction. So, if you haven't been with us for most of the webinars, there are details available. So what is it that makes the faith the most sustainable organizations in the world? How come we've been around for so long and probably will be around for so long? One of the issues I think that is very important is that the environmental movement in particular it gets very short term in its thinking, 2-3 year programs, 5-year programs if you're lucky. The SDGs are a 15-year program. As faiths, we think in generations. That's part of our wisdom. People do not change overnight. It very rarely happens. And that's a conversion experience. And quite often the conversion experience can be deeply powerful personally, but can also be something of a problem because those who've converted tend to be very sure about what they believe and quite sure that other people don't quite believe the same thing and it's not quite so right. So that process of gradually growing within our faiths, of developing a deeper understanding, that's something we take on for a life, for a lifetime. It's not something we do for 18 months or 3 years. So the faiths have a deep wisdom about human nature. And that comes through our theological and philosophical education and training. Those of us who, like myself, were trained as a theologian, as well as a religious studies specialist, we've learned to look at the processes by which human society works and moves and operates. And if we look at theological and philosophical education, for example, it's how do we pass on that wisdom to the next generation so that they can pass it on to the generation after that. We've been around a long time, as I've said. We've seen empires come and go, including the British one, actually. We've seen ideologies come and go. We've seen the collapse of fascism, at least we hope it's the collapse of fascism. We've seen the falling apart of communism. We've seen the rise of nationalism. And we've seen part of that also begin to ebb and flow away. We've been challenged. We've had our followers and our faithful people murdered. We've had our buildings destroyed or turned into secular use. And yet here we are still. And in many parts of the world, faiths are recovering from 100 years plus of the most brutal persecution and destruction of their role within society. And here we are again. Then there's crisis and adaptation. We are in the midst of a series of crises. And what the faith's wisdom parts is how to change, how to move forward, how to have the tools of reflection. And in one of the presentations today, we'll hear about a personal crisis that needed the wisdom of faith for that person to recover and come through. Now, liturgies, quotations, and orders of prayer. I'm an Anglican, a member of the Church of England, and I've always pointed out that unlike certain other Christian traditions, the Anglican Church has never produced a systematic theologian. Most of our theology as Anglicans comes from poetry. It comes from the great metaphysical poets of the 17th century and of marvelous poets like T.S. Eliot in the 20th century. And though that regular familiarity with the language of faith, which gives us a language to express how to deal with grief, how to deal with wonder, how to deal with strangeness, how to see a bigger, more wonderful world, comes through our liturgies, our quotations, and our prayers. And also prayer asks us to stand still for a moment and reflect. And within that tradition, we've also created in many of the faiths now, or helped the faiths create special days that focus, or even seasons that focus on our place within nature. Sacred places and pilgrimage. This is a huge area. Sacred places are those sort of extraordinary places where, to use T.S. Eliot's words, the veil between heaven and earth is gossamer thin, where you stand and you feel a sense either in nature, or you feel a sense of the sheer magnificence, the generosity, the wonder of creation, of the cycle of life, whatever phrase is appropriate. But there are also places where you go where great events have taken place, historic events within the life of the faith, or great figures that provide inspiration. And these places have become massively, massively popular recently. We estimate the pilgrimage has risen 200% in every faith over the last 20 or 30 years, placing a great strain on these sacred places. But people are going to those places because there is a sense of being in touch with something greater than just ordinary life. And then we have the theology and philosophy of nature and of our relationship with the rest of creation, of life on earth. And the great question there is, most secular thinking sees nature as something other than us. We study it. We try to protect it as though it wasn't us. In all our faiths, we know that we are part of a greater story, that there is a greater purpose behind life on earth, and that we need to find our place within that purpose. And the fundamental faith perspective is that we are a part of nature, not apart from it. We are not the managers of nature. We are part of it, and in different language, with the servants of it. We are at the service of the rest of life on earth. And then stories and practices. Stories are so important. Nobody was ever converted by a pie chart. We're converted by stories. We are moved by stories of what has happened. And for me, for example, there's an amazing story from our Anglo-Saxon church going back to around about 600 AD, in which the story of the crucifixion of Christ is told not from a human perspective. It is told from the perspective of the tree that was cut down in a forest, that was trimmed, and upon which Christ hung. And that ability of a story to take you to look at things from a completely different angle, that's quite amazing, quite astonishing. It opens different worlds. It makes us more capable of changing. And one of the great skills of the faiths is they have helped us to change, whilst at the same time appearing to be unchanging. Because of course they're always developing, but they know how to pace it. That's one of their wisdoms, how to pace it so that the human mind, the human soul, the psyche can go with it rather than be left behind or feel that it has to leave behind what we're saying. And then prayer. How do we ground ourselves? Where do we find the strength to continue? And in our various traditions, prayer reminds us at one level how tiny we are, but not how insignificant. And then finally, celebration. Celebration is about joy. One of the great gifts that we bring as the faiths to the environmental movement is that you don't have to tell people the whole time that they must not do this, that they mustn't eat that, they mustn't fly, they mustn't travel. Of course, we ask them to live a simpler lifestyle, but you cannot ask people to just live a simple lifestyle your entire life. What you have to do is also provide times of celebration. And there are wonderful things to celebrate, wonderful things to celebrate. One of the greatest pieces of wisdom that I was ever given was from a Jewish friend who said, you know, on the day of judgment, God will condemn you for every legitimate pleasure you could have had and did not take. A very necessary correlative to the tendency within the environmental movement and within some elements of faith to tell you to not do things. In a sense, the faith long-term plans is about inviting you, based on faith, to do things, to celebrate them, to have the wisdom to share with others our depth of knowledge. And so it's a great joy to bring us now to this session. We have 5 outstanding speakers, and I will introduce each of them as we come to them. But I'm delighted to ask Reverend Darren Lama Jones from the Center of Earth Ethics in New York at the Union Theological Seminary in New York to be our opening speaker. Darren, it's a great joy to invite you to join us today.
Thank you, Martin. It's an honor to be here. I bring you greetings from Brooklyn in New York City. As Martin stated, my name is Darren Lamar Jones. I work as the Director of Operations for the Center for Earth Ethics. The Center for Earth Ethics is a nonprofit organization rooted at Union Theological Seminary that works to reimagine the world's value systems and to reimagine the way in which we understand and determine worth so that it's more sustainable for all of the beings on this planet. The center was founded in 2015 after a conference that Union put on called Religions in the Earth, in which major faith leaders and major theologians, thought leaders from around the country came together at St. John the Divine, a very historic church in New York City, to discuss how to better understand and how to better conceive of a world in which faiths were doing their part to properly preserve the well-being of the planet and of nature. I don't think it's much of a secret that there are several facets of faith in America that are not only suspicious of climate change, but that are also antagonistic to the fight against climate change. And we are doing our best and working our hardest to convince them, using wisdom and using a whole host of understandings that I'll discuss in a moment, that climate change is imminent, that it is real, and that we as the servants of nature, as Martin so eloquently put it, have a responsibility and a duty, a God-given duty, to preserve and to maintain and to promote the growth and the sustenance of nature, of all the creatures that we share this planet with. The center performs, or rather works through 4 different interrelated programmatic thrusts. The first is sustainability and global affairs. The center is currently working very, very hard with a variety of personnel at the UN to put on a series of webinars that addresses the role of faith and ethics in food systems throughout the country. I'm sure a lot of you know that many supply chains and many food systems around the world have been historically rocked and historically shaken because of the pandemic. And we're working to see what ethical food systems and ethical supply chains for food systems look like, and offering an ethical lens by which to determine what those things are and to institute them. Secondly, the center operates on the programmatic thrust of environmental justice. There are currently several major pipeline fights happening in the United States that we are actively working against. One of the most notable is the attempt by 2 oil companies to institute a pipeline known as the Bahia pipeline through the state of Tennessee. This pipeline is currently slated to be tracked through a portion of Memphis, Tennessee that is predominantly Black, that also sits atop of an aquifer that provides 90% of the water to the city of Memphis. And we are actively engaged with several faith leaders on the ground to oppose that and to preserve the health and the well-being of the community in that environment. The third programmatic thrust that we operate in is called original caretakers. And this is a programmatic thrust that is solely focused on elevating the voices of Indigenous people in the Americas, particularly in the United States, and elevating the wisdom and the understanding and the practices that they have invoked for centuries in the maintenance and the well-being of the planet and of environments across the world, particularly in our case in the United States. We are very aware that prior to the age of colonization and prior to the intrusion into native-owned lands, first world peoples were in charge of the biospheres and the biodiversity of this country for centuries. And never did we see the degradation and the destruction that has been wrought by industrialization over the past 200 years. And keeping in mind the fact, rather, that a lot of this comes from the natural onpouring of industrialization and the expansion of populations and whatnot, there is still, we believe, a very, very conscientious and powerful contribution that first world peoples can make to the discussion of how to maintain and how to contribute to the proliferation of nature and not the destruction of it. And finally, what brings me here today is our fourth thrust, which is eco-ministry. Eco-ministry at the center is basically the understanding and the practice of training faith practitioners and training faith communities and training para-faith communities and how they can promote nature through wisdom, through the teaching of Bible studies, through the preaching of sermons, through the engaging in the creation of liturgy and worship songs and worship practices. And we do our best to give theologians and to give faith practitioners the tools that they need to properly communicate to their congregants the importance of nature and the very, very divinely appointed role that we have in preserving it. One thing that Martin spoke about earlier today that really struck a chord in me is kind of a repositioning and a repoising of the theological underpinnings of Christian belief. And in my experience, and in my particular practice as a Christian and as a faith leader in Christianity, so that we better position people to view this fight for climate not as the avoidance of damnation, but as the opportunity for fulfilled and fully experienced life. The center recently performed a Bible study that kind of repositioned the story of creation and repositioned the fall from being punitive to being a call and an opportunity for reconciliation and redemption, and a call for a pursuit of a fully realized vision of God's ideal for human interaction with the planet. In exploring Genesis chapter 2, we discussed with those that are attending the idea that in Genesis chapter 2, we have a snapshot of what perfection looks like. We have a snapshot of God operating in perfect harmony with humanity, of men operating in perfect harmony with women, of humanity operating in perfect harmony with all of living creatures in the biodiversity of Eden, and also of humanity operating in perfect harmony with Eden, or with the earth, or with the flora, or with the green itself. And then we see in Genesis chapter 3, immediately after Genesis chapter 2, the degradation of that. We see that after original sin, or after the fall, we see the destruction of the intimacy between God and humanity. We see the destruction of the intimacy between man and woman. We see the destruction of the intimacy between humanity and animals. And we see the destruction of the intimacy between man and the earth. And from that particular analysis of Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3, we came to the realization that sin, disobeying the duties and the responsibilities of God, is not about God desiring for us not to have fun, quote unquote, or not about God desiring for us not to make him angry. It's more about God creating guardrails that keep us on the proper path to enjoy the fullness that is possible for us to experience. That the reason why we should engage in ethical action, the reason why we should protect the well-being of the planet and of our fellow people and of our fellow animals is that we have a responsibility, we have a divinely ordained and a divinely recognizable role in allowing the world to engage in the harmony originally envisioned by God. And that the same thing applies to our interaction with the earth. That in our fight against climate change, in our fight against pipelines, in our fight against all of the actions that we're currently engaging in that are destroying the planet, we're not fighting against those actions for the purposes of merely existing or not being destroyed or foregoing the damnation of civilization. We're fighting against those actions so that we can actually inherit and receive and walk into the possibilities of what it means to live in a full, whole, entirely realized vision of what God intends for us to experience. And with that, I'll pass over to Martin. Thank you.
Darren, thank you very much indeed. And just to make the point to everybody that we will have, we hope, quite a considerable time for question and answer and discussion at the end of all our presentations. And I know many will want to pick up on what Darren's touched. Thank you very much indeed, Darren, for that. It's now a great joy to also welcome to this an old friend, Tequila Chungyalpa, who is the director of the LOCA initiative at the Center for Healthy Minds and Healthy Minds Innovations at the University of Wisconsin and Madison. And Tequila has been one of the great pioneers, one of the great workers on this whole area of faith and environment. And it has taken a toll on her. And it is very much from her Buddhist perspective that she will be giving us her sense of wisdom. But Tequila has worked with every major faith and brings a great wisdom about how to work with faith. Hi, Tequila. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
So thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Martin. As Martin said, I have been working with faith leaders all over the world. It was not something I planned at all. I am a trained conservationist. I started my career with the World Wildlife Fund in 2000. And when Martin started by saying that, conservationists speak to conservationists, that really, that's exactly what my life was like. I come from a very remote part of the Himalayas called Sikkim. I am a daughter of what I think is rare in the Buddhist tradition, which is I'm a daughter of a female Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And I grew up in wilderness, really. My mother was a unusual woman. She took her vows and in the later part of her life, and she went into solitary retreat, which some of you might know of, but it's a very well-known tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. And that typically means you are in retreat for 3.5 years, more or less. And it's a very grueling process. In the old days, it used to be up in the mountains, in the caves, and you weather winter and summer and whatever comes with that. And part of your spiritual realization is that you overcome all the physical challenges, right? So I grew up in a way that is now probably very rare. I grew up in a very traditional Himalayan Tibetan culture. And I grew up not necessarily knowing that there was a separation between me as Tequila, as an individual, and nature, because I spent so much time in that area. And I had this really deep reverence and a palpable sort of tenderness for nature. My family sent me to the US. My aunt lived here and sent me to the US to study. And I came here when I was 15. My mother was in retreat, like I said. And I, of course, became an environmentalist immediately. And I went on to study environmental studies. Now I can say what happened, but at that time I had no words to describe what was happening to me internally, which was, there was a kind of schism that was created when I went to school here in the US. all of a sudden, I felt like I was pushed through this tunnel and told I had to make a choice. And on one side was science, reason, rationality, right? The idea that objectivity is of primary importance, and that it's achievable, and that it's something a good scientist aspires to. And then on the other side, it was, you know, everything I'd been raised with, the belief that nature is real, the belief and alive, the belief that there are spirits imbued in nature, the belief in interdependence, in the laws of karma, right? Cause and effect, and my own entire cosmology of Tibetan Buddhism. And I describe it in a way that as I went through this education and then I went on to work at WWF and other NGOs actually, what happened was I became a professional environmental science person at day and almost furtively a practicing Tibetan Buddhist at night. I'd created this kind of schism in myself to survive what I was told are to survive the value system of the West. And I was successful at what I did. I was the youngest field director for the World Wildlife Fund. I had become the director of their Greater Mekong program in Southeast Asia. Now, for a brown woman from the Himalayas to break through that ceiling is a big deal. Typically, if you are brown or indigenous, a person of color, you get to be an expert in the locale that you belong to. But it's rare that you're allowed to transfer your expertise to other regions or at a more global level, right? And that's just part of how racism affects us in an everyday sort of setting. And so I knew I was supposed to feel really good about the fact that I'd broken this boundary. And all of the people in my community, my friends who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, people who are from the Himalayas, were really proud of me because conservation is very white and very neo-colonial. And I was deeply unhappy. I was basically having a crisis because I had moved from working on community-based conservation in the Himalayas, thinking this was great and really valuable and not big enough in scale to address the environmental issues. And I had then decided, okay, the scale wasn't big enough with community-based conservation, and then moved to working in the Mekong, which was river basin, right? 5 countries. So one would think that that scale is big enough. And then finding the reality, which was that, of course, that's not big enough. You have 6 governments, all of whom put their economic interests first. All of these quite rapacious private sector sort of companies coming in because they're interested in extracting one particular resource. And how do you, who works on environmental issues, how do you stitch all of these different pieces together while also trying to build community ownership and community leadership, right? So I was in this crisis moment because what happened was I realized that everything I was seeing in front of me, the loss of wildlife in the forests I grew up in, the impacts of climate change that were visible, the changes in the monsoon, all of these were going to have impacts on the people I loved, the people I belong to, starting to understand the impact just on Asia alone. And then the wilderness that I loved and all the wildlife I felt connected to. And so now we have a term for it, which is eco-anxiety. But at that time we didn't. In 2007, I hadn't heard of it. The closest thing I had was Glenn Albrecht had just come out. He's this great Australian environmental philosopher. He had just come out with this paper on solastalgia. And solastalgia basically really, it's interesting. It connects with Carl Jung, who came up with anima mundi, right? This concept that our soul is larger than our body. And our soul isn't restricted to our body, which comes from indigenous traditions, which is sort of, we all share one soul. And so what Glenn was talking about was that when we have an identity that is larger than our body, that sort of spreads out into nature, and nature is harmed, we take it personally. For those of us who identify as environmentalists, who feel this deep connection to nature, it's a personal pain and it's a personal grief. And reading that was liberating for me because I suddenly could understand why conservationists were in crisis and why all of us were basically showing signs of PTSD and trauma. Um, and as it happened, and I always think about it in terms of the laws of karma or kismet or the hand of God, um, I ended up going to Bodh Gaya, which is the main pilgrimage site for Tibetan Buddhists and for all Buddhists where Buddha was enlightened. And when I got there, His Holiness the Karmapa was giving a talk. And now my family takes me there every year, insists I have to go. I am sort of practicing Buddhist, but really just following what my family demands. I got there and I listened to His Holiness the Karmapa speak. His Holiness is in many ways seen as a successor to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in terms of legacy. He is the head of the Karma Kagyu lineage, which is my lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, and he is this great environmentalist. So he gave a talk connecting vegetarianism to ethics and to climate change. And he basically, by the end of the talk, explained why he was a vegetarian. And then he was asking more than 10,000 people there, would they be willing to give up meat as part of their Buddhist practice? And the sea of hands went up, including mine. And I just had this out of body experience where I was looking at what was happening and as a social scientist sort of going, oh my God, this is behavior change. This is mass scale behavior change. And I'm watching someone that I've never considered would be an ally to conservation or climate or environmental issues. And honestly, having this moment like, what kind of fool am I that I've never thought about this? Because I come, I'm the daughter of a Buddhist teacher, and it has never occurred to me to reach out to religious teachers, religious leaders. And so that was the beginning of what I now think of as this sort of bifurcation in my journey and in my career. Not long after, I had a meeting with His Holiness, and he ended up asking me to create environmental guidelines for Tibetan Buddhist monasteries and nunneries. And when we finished creating that, what I thought of as, my personal project during annual leave, the response that we got from the monks and nuns was so strong. What I discovered was this hunger for science. All these monks and nuns were asking questions like, tell me why the monsoon pattern changed. Tell me why there are increased droughts in this area. Tell me why the price of onions went up. The hunger for science was so palpable. And what they asked for impromptu on the spot was a science training. So we ended up doing this unexpected 6-day training with all these senior monks and nuns, explaining things like the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. And when they came back after that conference was over, they had a meeting with His Holiness and me. And what they ended up saying was, it's not enough that we learned this. We want to do something about it. And so that's how the Koryuk movement was born. We have over 50 Tibetan Buddhist monasteries and nunneries across the Himalayas, from Ladakh to Bhutan, that do everything from forest reforestation, river cleanups, that do rainwater harvesting, that are every second Saturday of the month that go out in the community and clean the community, pick up garbage, sort through it very visibly. And if you know the Himalayas and the context, this idea of monks leaving their brocaded high seats to come down to the community and take us broom and actually sweep it's very jarring.
Takeda, I'm going to have to pause you here for a moment so we can let others in. I could listen to you for hours. Indeed, I have listened to you for hours and enjoyed every minute of it. And we do have a resource, which is the PowerPoint, I think, that was created, which Pippa will put the details up on. But there will be an opportunity to ask questions. But Takeda, thank you for taking us deeply into your own personal experience. And we will come back to that because it touches many people. But thank you. And I thank you for getting up early in the morning too. Very much appreciated, as you pointed out to me. So our next speaker is another very dear friend. This is Reverend Dr. Jostram Kurithadam from the Vatican. And Father Josh, as he is known to all, as a very appropriate, is one of the most happy people I think I've ever met in my life. He is always joyful. He is the coordinator of the sector of ecology and creation at the Vatican Dicastery for the promotion and the integrity of human development. He is also chair of philosophy and science, philosophy of science, apologies, and director of the Institute of Social and Political Sciences at the Salesian Pontifical University in Rome. Also a major writer on this topic, a beloved friend in terms of the work that he has done for so many years. So, Father Josh, if I may be so familiar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And as I speak to you from the Vatican, very humbly, please allow me to bring you best wishes, greetings, and prayers from our beloved Pope Francis. Right at the outset, I would like to thank Martin for this invitation. And also very happy to be part of this August panel. And Tequila, I know her very well. She's like a sister to me, and happy to know more people. And thank you for asking me to speak on wisdom and Laudato Si. So I prepared a very simple PowerPoint presentation, wisdom for earth care. And for a few days, I was thinking how to synthesize what Laudato Si, the wisdom of Laudato Si about earth care. And I thought probably these three words that have already come in some of our earlier interventions, these three words could probably sum them up: of joy, but also grief and hope. Joy is, as Martin said, I teach cosmology. And one of the homeworks I give to my students every day, like when I teach in the semester, that they should not go to bed without having looked at the night sky, that we realize that we are part of this immense universe, and of which Earth is, and Earth is really our home. So the moment of joy, this is sort of this wow moment, that we are so privileged to live in this special planet, this blessed with the gift of life. And I think that's the first lesson, insight we can learn, that Earth is our home. And Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si has the subtitle on care for our common home. And for us believers, it's even deeper, that we realize that Earth is creation, is sacred. The ground on which we stand is holy. As Moses was asked to remove his sandals, that we cannot just afford to trample and destroy this land. And to quote Pope Francis, he says, God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. So Earth is God's sacred book, and every page of it, every creature, every tree, every bird are God's own letters, God's own revelation. That's why creation is indeed the very first epiphany revelation of God. And every creature is the object of God's love. And I don't want to read the citation, but then the idea is, that Earth is sort of a love letter from God. What Dante, and this year we are celebrating Dante in Italy, who says love is of this love which moves everything, planets and stars, everything. So the first response, so the way we look at the Earth has to be this wow, this contemplation. That's what Saint Francis of Assisi, and not for anything else, that Pope Francis took the name of Saint Francis of Assisi, this harmony with the natural world. Dr. Darren already mentioned about our original vocation. What was the first commandment? Or, I like to joke saying that the first job description that we find about humans in the Bible is right at the beginning, Genesis 2:15. We are asked to cultivate and take care of this, to till and cultivate this garden. So that is the first job given to us. Now we are in this home, take care of it. So this is the moment of joy. The second is the moment of grief. So I think it's sort of, you look out and you see the beautiful earth, our beautiful home, but then, and then begins the moment of grief, that we realize that, as Lynn White, as all of us are familiar with, already in 1967, he said, surely no creature other than the human person has ever managed to foul its nest in such short order. Tequila, who lived in harmony with it, so much in harmony with the natural world, no species would ever do it. It would destroy its own nest. But that's the most precious, important place for any species, its own nest. And we are destroying our own nest, our own home. And this is the moment to look within. And we realize that if there is disharmony outside, and this is second insight, I would like to share with you, it's because of disharmony within. We need to remember that at the deepest level, the ecological crisis is a profoundly spiritual crisis. It has to do with something within. And I would love to quote Pope Francis right at the beginning of Laudato Si. He says, the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. So if there is disharmony outside, it's because of that disharmony within us. If there's degradation outside, it's only reflecting the degradation within us. And allow me also to quote Pope Benedict, who I was watching live this mass from the UK. I was studying there the day he became Pope, and it struck me in the opening homily as Pope. He said, "The external deserts are expanding because the internal deserts have become so vast." It's so true. So recycling can help, avoiding plastic can help, but unless we reach the deepest level of ourselves, probably we cannot really bring about change. And that's all because everything is connected. Another beautiful quotation from Laudato Si, that human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with earth itself. And sin is the rupture of these relationships, as Darren put it so beautifully in the case of when Cain kills his brother Abel, chapter 3 of Genesis. Chapter 2 is the picture of harmony. And after Cain kills his brother Abel, and Abel's innocent blood soaks the ground, the same garden changes its nature. It's no more a garden. It becomes a place where only thorns and thistles grow. Imagine. So there's so much of climate injustice. Tequila mentioned about racist attitudes and so all these have an impact on the natural world outside. And then the very classical example is that of after Cain has shed the blood of his own brother, the same garden becomes barren, becomes a desert. And this is a very, very profound insight that we need to learn. And this is the wisdom of the faith communities. I can also quote Hosea, who speaks of the sins of the people of Israel, and he says, the rivers are polluted and they don't give any more fish because Israel has sinned against the poor, has sinned against the orphans, the widows. So injustice can lead to ecological degradation. And the third point is it's a moment of hope. So joy, grief, hope. Hope is that all is not lost, that we can make a new start, and we can together, and the word I want to stress here, I'd like to also quote Earth Charter here, that together we can make a difference. And in all religious traditions, the Sangha of the Buddhist community or the Christian community, the parish or whatever, all religions are communitarian. There's no religion that is not communitarian. So the hope is that we can make a difference together. We can act together and that is the hope. So I see Martin has come on the screen, so I'm also winding up. So, and then the last moment is, so it's time to act together. I just want to present, a project that the Vatican has come up with, that what we call the Laudato Si Action Platform, to make communities around the world totally sustainable in the spirit of the integral ecology of Laudato Si. So we are asking, beginning a 7-year journey of ecological conversion, real action with our families, with our parishes and dioceses, schools, universities, hospitals, healthcare centers, economy, businesses, farms, or everyone, religious orders. So in 7 years, you become a Laudato Si parish, but what we call sustainable or green or whatever you want to call it. But the idea is 2021, we are going to begin. 2022, a new group will begin, and hopefully double the number of this. 2023, the double of that. And we hope we can make it an ecumenical, interreligious journey as we try to rebuild our common home. So just the 3 words of joy, grief, but especially of hope, that together we can rebuild our common home. And that is the wisdom that the religious faiths are offering us today. Thank you very much.
Father George, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And we are delighted that the Laudato Si platform is also a partner with Faith Invest and with the WWF Beliefs and Values for developing faith long-term plans. We're delighted, and the leadership you're playing in that. So thank you very much indeed. Tremendous. We now go to colleagues in China, and Linda Wong is going to be presenting on behalf of the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, which, as you will hear, had a much simpler title in its early days. And we're also delighted to be joined by the Secretary General of CBC-GDF, Dr. Jinfeng Zhou, who will join us, I think, more for the question and answer. Linda, we're over to you for presentation. And Linda is also a visiting professor at Xinjiang Foreign Language University and a member of the IUCN's Commission on Environmental, Economic and Social Policy. And we have worked together first through ARC and now through Faith Invest and Beliefs and Values for a number of years, particularly on the programs with Taoists and Buddhists in China. Linda, we're delighted to have you with us. I know it's late in the evening in Beijing, so we are extremely grateful. And over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Wang from China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. Founded in 1985, the CBC-GDF originated from the mule deer reintroduction from the China-UK friendship from Duke of Bedford, who kindly sent some critically endangered mule deers back to China. And today, the CBC-GDF is a leading environmental NGO, and tradition and faith-based conservation is one of our key working areas. Here are some major Chinese tradition and faith-based wisdoms like Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, or they have played very important roles in Chinese culture and strongly influenced and shaped the Chinese philosophy, languages, and values. Today, the tradition wisdom are quietly leading the revival of environmental protection activities with the Chinese characteristics. I would give you an example. This is Taoism, China's leading indigenous religion. The guiding principle of Taoism, also in Chinese, it is called Dao, or way or road. Classics like the Dao De Jing, Taiping Jing, believe there is a harmonious natural order that arises between human and nature. Also, it has developed a 7-year plan for the long-term planning for environmental protection in China, in the Chinese Taoism community. I will give you some examples. These are their their suggestions to the how to save endangered animals, and without using them in medicines, prohibit the use of endangered animals such as pangolins. As you see in this picture, this one is a pangolin. We are very delighted to see this because we have worked for years to protect this the world's most trafficked mammals, and we try to change its fate. And now, after years of consistent efforts, the situation has improved largely. Another story I would like to share with you is the inappropriate commercialized mercy release and illegal wildlife trade. Every year, our volunteers, we have a national volunteers network composed of tens of thousands CBCGDF volunteers. Every year, they will report to us about the illegal wildlife trade, hunting, because of the commercialized market driven by large-scale organized mercy release. Of course, over the past years, that is good at the individual level, but when it comes to today, with the strong power of marketing, it has become a nightmare for many wildlife. As you see in these two pictures, these are were taken by our volunteers reporting. And here in the center, you can see a price list about wildlife. This is horrible. So we'll work together with the Chinese famous Master Xinwen. This Master Xinwen, we have worked together to launch a lot of the initiatives and environmental awareness events. These are some paintings from the some of our events over the past years. We educate children, especially young children, to think, to care about environment, and to learn about what the environmental crisis we are facing today. And Master Xinwen also called for the Buddhist believers to not to do the inappropriate wildlife release, because he called it as it equals to kill life. So stop doing that. This environmental awareness promotion has achieved a lot of the past years. And this one, thanks for the previous keynote speaker sharing about this very amazing initiative. Actually, we have found that there is a lot in common between Chinese traditions and relations with the Western ones. So we shared a lot in common. These two pictures were taken in 2017. We were invited by the Pope Francis, and we were so honored to present. As you can see, here's a little gift, a big gift actually. It is the robins of the a popular style in Tang, Chinese Tang dynasty. We presented these robins to him as a gift. It shows the Chinese ancient belief that that different cultures can show mutual respect, inclusiveness, harmonious, and independence, and these are highly valued over the past and as well as today. The next slide is about some stories from our work. As you see in this picture, the forest is located in Yunnan, China. It is one of the most biodiverse hotspots in the earth, and we have supported local communities to do community conservation for sacred hills. Those forests, although they are not very big, but they conserve a highly biodiverse ecology and species. You know, we are facing challenges like COVID-19 today. If we can, if our human can show some respect to the nature, actually, the next disease X will be able to be prevented. Also, another case is about our community conservation area for critically endangered species called this kind of gibbon. As you can see in this picture, it is also in Wuliangshan Mountain in Yunnan province, where you know the Kunming, the next Convention on Biological Diversity next COP15 will be held there. So this young female, she's from a minor ethnic group, and she worked very hard to call for people to care to ecology and endangered species, and her family guarded this area for more than 1,000 years. Last but not least, kindly allow me to introduce some of the trends in China about the revival of traditional culture in China. This sentence, as you can see, is by our President, Mr. Xi Jinping. He said, Chinese traditional culture is broad and profound. Learning and mastering the essence of traditional thoughts is very beneficial to establish one's worldview, philosophy, and values. And the last picture you can see is Chinese Valentine's Day. It is also called Double Seven Day. When I was young, when I was at college, it was fashionable to spend the Western holidays, but now Chinese young generation favors the traditional ones more and more. You can see there are a lot of officially announced traditional festivals to be respected and set as legal holidays. It was starting from 12 years ago. This is another example of the guidelines for improving education of Chinese traditional culture by China's Ministry of Education. It values the relationship between human and nature and ecological civilization. Thank you. And lastly, the tradition actually will be more and more valued in China's next generations. As you can see, this trend starting from 2017, the proportion of ancient texts has been greatly increased by 80% in Chinese textbooks in school systems, and it become so you can see clearly that the young generations today in China, they care and they love to learn from traditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Linda. That's a wonderful presentation. We now come to our question and answer session, or indeed possibly more appropriately, our discussion session. Pippa, I think, has joined us or is about to join us to marshal the questions, and then I will ask our wonderful panel from all around the world with a depth of experience that frankly I just think is so exciting. You bring so many different perspectives to the same issue but from different sources. So Pippa, where are we? What have we got?
Yes, thank you. We have a question here from Metropolitan Seraphim Kikotis, Metropolitan of Zimbabwe and Angola of the Orthodox Church. He asks Father Josh specifically, if you could tell us a bit more about the important initiative of the Holy See for interfaith meetings as preparation for COP26. And he thanks all of the presenters for their wonderful presentations too.
So perhaps, Father Josh, you could give us a brief account of what is being planned, and then perhaps we can throw this wider open to find out what other groups are doing, because I know that Darren and I also Tequila are involved with this as, with their own initiatives around different faiths. So, but Father Josh, what are the plans within the Vatican for helping the faiths to focus more, perhaps more intensely and also more practically on the issues that will be discussed at COP26 in Glasgow about climate change.
Thank you, Martin. And there are several initiatives being planned, we are also thinking of the pre-COP in Milan. So there's going to be a living chapel there of trees and plants, but like there's several initiatives, but I think the question was mainly about the interfaith meeting being organized by the Vatican. Now, that has been going on for some time. The initiative is of the Vatican, but also the UK Embassy to the Holy See and the Italian Embassy to the Holy See. So these are three co-hosts. And we have something like 70 religious leaders being contacted. And once a month, we already had 3-4 meetings. So every last Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, of the month, we meet together, nearly 2 hours. Scientists, religious leaders, these are the two main components. And we have a dialogue. The idea is on the 4th of October. By now, most people know about it, so I can say that. The idea is to have a meeting in Rome of the religious leaders, and Pope Francis will host them, and to send a very powerful message, all the religions together, that we want a strong COP. And not just for the COP, but also for the COP15 and for Care for Our Common Home. It is very much in line with what you have been organizing, but then a very visible moment where faith leaders come together and say, we need to protect our common home, and the earth is sacred. So that's what's it's going on. And next week, we'll have a monthly meeting. And the idea is also to come out with a document which will be signed by all the religious leaders, which will then be handed over to the presidency of the COP. So in short, that way.
Thank you, Father Josh. And just to say that the coordinator from the British government side is Alison Hilliard, who was my deputy director at ARC for many, many years. And we have been able to feed in the Faith long-term plans as part of the background thinking. But I'm intrigued, Father Josh, by this fusion of scientists with theologians. Tequila, that's what you, in a sense, had to get away from, and now you've kind of come back to. What's the strength within that sort of partnership? I'm going to ask our other colleagues too, because all of you are actually working on this interface, not just between faiths, but between faiths and science. So Tequila, what for you is the most significant element now that you've reconciled both in yourself? How has that shaped your planning for these the sort of partnerships that Father Josh is talking about?
Mm-hmm. So I think it really matters that we bring the best of both traditions together to address a problem that is ultimately human, right? Human caused, human created, and we collectively, I think, have to heal the schism that I mentioned, this sort of idea that faith exists in one realm and science exists in the other realm. So the program I created at UW-Madison, the LOCA initiative, brings the strengths of science and religion together. And we are working right now with 3 different, what I, to the science world, often describe as the most overlooked, important stakeholder group, which is faiths. And the 3 communities that we do a lot of capacity building with scientists and policymakers in the room, are evangelical Christians, First Nation leaders here in Wisconsin and the Midwest, the Midwest area in the US, but also indigenous leaders globally, and the Tibetan Buddhist monastics that I started all of this with, right, working with. And what we are doing, as opposed to focusing on the COPs, what we are doing is actually focusing on all the dotted line that leads to the COPs. So one of the trainings that we're doing, and that I'm actually about to do next month in partnership with Arosha, Care of Creation, and the World Evangelical Alliance, is around storytelling. And you started this talk by talking about storytelling, and Father Josh also said something similar. Basically bringing the power of narrative from the faith tradition to change people's minds. We know in the US that climate denialism is particularly acute in white evangelical and white Catholic communities. We as scientists really don't have a bridge in. we are not the trusted source. So what we can do best is work with the faith leaders who are and provide them the resources they need. So LOCA is basically, I think of it as a service program and platform, which is we are in service to faith leaders who are trying to protect creation and the world. And we are trying to fill in all the dots and the gaps leading to the COPs.
Thank you. Linda and Jinfeng, you come at this very much from the science side and have increasingly become engaged with the faiths, not least because of this wonderful Chinese phrase of ecological civilization. What's your driving passion behind this linking between the worlds of science and mainstream conservation and the faith traditions of China? Either Linda or Jinfeng.
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, the mainstreaming is not an easy thing. It takes a lot of efforts. The science, although I will give you some examples. The chopsticks or the reusable, disposable utensils, food takeout utensils, waste a lot of resources and bring a lot of unnecessary waste. Although science has proved that that's totally unnecessary, and we can do, but the general public, it takes time to mainstreaming to the general public, and it also needs some holistic approach. For example, 5 years ago, that's back in 2016, if you order a meal via any Chinese food takeout app, there, no matter you want disposable utensils or not, they will say, give you 2 or 3. That's a lot of unnecessary waste of resources. So we started advocating. At first, we resorted to the management department, but they taught us this is nothing wrong because this is good customer service. You appreciate that, but we don't agree that. We worked with China has the environmental protection law. In the Article 58, it encourages NGOs to sue those polluters to safeguard environmental public interest. That's why worked with other experts and NGOs, we filed China's first environmental public interest litigations against China's leading 3 takeout companies. The second day after the courts accepted our litigations, all the major food takeout apps add choice on their apps, allowing consumers to click, I don't want that. As you see today, the volume is very big. Every day, millions of orders are placed on the app. So little efforts can make a big change.
Yes, you highlighted in your talk, or you briefly showed the 3 incense stick movement, yes, which in a yes, sense was exactly the same thing, wasn't it? Because I remember going to temples, 10, 20 years ago, people were burning thousands of incense sticks. Now they are asked to only burn 3, one for heaven, one for earth, one for themselves. It's these small signs are a sign that you do not need to be that consumerist person. That's brilliant. Darren, can I turn to you on this? Because not only are you at the Ethics Center, but you're also a pastor of one of these sort of, quite small churches with 15,000 members, which to we Anglicans sounds like the entire Anglican community of England. In terms of your role as a pastor, clearly with the concerns you have, how useful, how important is science and that level of detailed information for you in a preaching pastoral role within such a mega church?
I think science is particularly important. But one thing that I think that really isn't discussed often is kind of people of faith are constantly being asked to allow science to inform them, but we don't see the reverse. We don't see scientists being asked how their faith informs them. When you think back to the 1500s or the 1600s, every scientist was a theologian, from Galileo to Copernicus, And now there's just this dearth of faith in science that causes people to question it. One, because you question the motivations behind scientists, and two, because in light of some of the major missteps that have happened during the pandemic, particularly in America and revolving the scientific community, there's a desire to know that there is some faith informing science. So what I try to do, it's been difficult to find resources that do this, is really show parishioners and show people of faith how faith still informs science, similar to how it did earlier in our history.
Thank you, Darren. Pippa, what other questions do we have?
Yes, we have a question from Arthur Dahl, who I think is asking everybody to come up with examples. How can we all provide positive alternatives to the materialist consumer society that will give young people a morally grounded, sustainably motivated future?
Okay, Father Josh, could I ask you to start with that one? Because you are at the university, as is Tequila. What are you finding resonates with young people? And do they want an alternative to the materialist culture?
Thank you, Martin. And the good thing is, I'm not very young, not too very old, but I can speak with a certain, the good thing I realize is that the young people are much more open to change than probably what we were, or the generations before. That's a very positive thing. At the same time, we need to offer them a paradigm. I always think of Thomas Kuhn, one of my favorite, historians of science, who says it's true that with Galileo and the geocentric paradigm was not scientifically correct. Copernicus had already said that, but then it took Galileo, it took almost a century for the paradigm to change, unless and until scientists came with an alternative. So we can criticize the present materialistic culture. So we need to offer an alternative. I think that's where we, especially from the faith traditions, can really contribute a lot. And there, I think it's, we need, and young people are seeing that, there's a different way of living. It was Darren who mentioned about the fullness of life. Now, as Martin, you also mentioned, it's not about being world negating, or, I was always impressed by Mother Teresa, or the sisters of Mother Teresa now. Wherever you see them, in fact, I see like at the Vatican, when they're there, the television, the cameras are straight on them, but there's something that attracts people. Now, Mother Teresa's sisters, they say, and Mother Teresa wanted that they don't have more than 2 pairs of saris, just 2 pairs, and one for special occasions. So you wash one, use the next one, wash the previous one. And on feast days, you have the third one, or when they go from one place to another, they just put all their things into a basket. But you see them, they're so joyful, So that's what, so, we are not publicized. We don't, we have people like that, or Pope Francis. I mean, he uses a second-hand car and he lives in a 2-room apartment, and he's a credible witness, So I think we need to offer these alternatives and show that there's much more life here. That's what our own religious leaders, Buddha or Gandhi or Jesus, or they all did and we do have an alternative paradigm, and let's not be afraid to propose that. And if I can take 30 seconds, I was very impressed meeting a group of young people in Germany and having a meal together. And almost everyone, Tequila mentioned, was a vegetarian. They are far ahead, And I'm also vegetarian, Tequila, so I don't use meat. So, but then to say that young people are disencouraging, but we need to offer them a credible alternative paradigm, which is there in our religious traditions, and offer it with joy and hope.
That's wonderful. Thank you. But Tequila, what's your experience of what is changing people, apart from the Kamapa addressing 18,000 people and telling them not to eat meat? I mean, apart from that, what else can you tell us to encourage us?
I'm not sure that it's the young people that are changing as much as us, we who are in our 40s and who are older, because what I see in the US in this time of great suffering is also this incredible, probably the largest civil rights movement that's happening, and the integration of civil rights with environmental rights. And this recognizing, it was created by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, this idea of intersectionality, which is you can't work on poverty separately or health separately or climate and environment separately and anti-racism separately. They are all part of the same fight. And I think one of the interesting things that happens in these convenings that I create between faith and science, and which are often geographically very diverse and intergenerational, is that creating these spaces so that the wisdom flows both ways. And we are not sitting with our old age, and I'm 46 now, so I can put myself in that group, and thinking that we own the wisdom, because actually what I see is young people with a clarity of purpose and a clarity of understanding that everything is connected. They don't have the luxury we did of assuming that the world is stable. And we will, we had this luxury of assuming that if we studied, we would get a job, it would allow us to buy our house with the picket fence, and that while environmental problems would happen, it would stop at our door. And we would be safe because we had bought into that neoliberal dream that wealth equals to safety, right? And young people have just completely cut that off and said, not only is this unsustainable for the planet, this is not realistic for me. I know already that my future is unstable and unpredictable because of climate change. And I can see that the system that was created and was successful because it oppressed so many other people. I mean, neoliberalism and the capitalism is a model that I always call a pyramid scheme. The top, the peak, the people at the peak really benefit, right? But who is left holding the back? Well, we know in the US, it's Black people, it's Indigenous people, it's people of color, right? It's poorer classes, it's women and children. And so what has happened, I think, especially in the last 10 years, but now especially because of the Black Lives Matter and because of what I think of all the Black women I know who are incredible leaders, is that there is now an infusion into other movements in the United States among the youth. So there is a sort of permeability that's happening, and that gives me great hope and joy because, the suffering that's on our skin right now is a path to liberation. That allows us to talk about
to take that part, yes. Linda, can I ask you, in terms, you've already spoken about these choices about not taking all the plastic or even wooden chopsticks. What are you seeing in China, which of course we all look at and think, my God, it's kind of eating up the planet along with America and Europe and so forth. What do you see that gives you hope in terms of different values amongst young people, and where are those values coming from?
Actually, according to my observation, more and more people, young people, feel that the green lifestyle is a kind of fashion. For example, if you go to Starbucks, you will see much more, than previous years, much more young consumers that bring their own mugs, cups, and as a reward, the Starbucks also give them 4 RMB discount to encourage them to do so. I can see a good cycle between the business and the consumers, and there is an emerging new fashion in China, at least in China. This is very good.
Thank you very much. And Darren, we're going to have to wrap up. But Darren, if you were to point to one thing that particularly through the Bible study that you spoke of, that has actually led people to question what Dakila said, of my generation, your generation have grown up to expect in this world that is now not stable. From your Bible study, what is it that people go, I see. That's what we need to change to? What is there?
I think the most transformative thing I've seen for people has really been prayer and meditation. And I think that prayer and meditation takes on tremendous new value in our current context because we're constantly bombarded with noise via constantly being in front of a screen, via it being social media or television or work or computers. And I think the constant noise in our life causes people to become overwhelmed and inundated and easily manipulated because they're not aware. And for us, just the practice of well, prior to COVID, gathering in person and not being on your phone for an hour and reading a physical book and talking to someone face to face is incredibly transformative. You know, I think one thing that's really funny is that we frequently look for this, and I'll stop. We frequently look for new solutions when faiths have always offered solutions that have been sufficient throughout time. And especially now, when we're constantly on and constantly consuming media, just the stillness of prayer and the stillness of meditation and the absence of electronics is really, really transformative and really, really reviving to the soul.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you all four of you for a tremendous distillation of great wisdoms. Just to point out that we have other webinars coming up. We have the advocacy webinar on the 27th of April and the media webinar on the 18th of May, and our current webinars, including this one, are available on our site and on the YouTube. I just want to finish with something from His Royal Highness Prince Philip. I was his religious advisor for 36 years. Huge fun. We used to have amazing arguments and wonderful times together. But his basic reason for launching the whole program of bringing the faith into partnership with the environmental and conservation movements was this. He said, if you believe in God or the gods, or that there is a purpose behind why everything is here, then why in God's name aren't you trying to make sure it's here for the next generations? And that, I think, is the wisdom of all our traditions. Thank you, Dakila. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Father Josh. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And I wish you a wisdom-filled day for the rest of the day. Thank you. God bless.